That summer, the sun seemed more merciless than ever. Estela, who had just turned 12, had already gotten used to the idea that her childhood would be very different from that of others. Every day, she woke up before the roosters even crowed, hurriedly tied her hair into a bun, and went out with her mother, carrying the old wicker basket filled with sweets that she herself had prepared at night. The house where they lived was a small room with walls stained by damp and fragile tiles that creaked in any wind. Her mother, Donna Lourdes, had been a strong woman, but her body could no longer keep up with her strength. The disease in her lungs kept her bedridden, her breathing always ragged and her gaze oscillating between pain and guilt. Estela carried the world on her shoulders, but without complaining, she thought that was just how life worked. That particular afternoon, Estela had sold less than usual. People were walking in a hurry, irritated by the suffocating heat, and few were interested in the brigadeiros she had made so much of. She was walking back home, her feet burning in her worn-out flip-flops, when she decided to take a shortcut through a little traveled stretch behind a vacant lot. It was a place she usually avoided, too quiet, surrounded by high walls and with that sour smell of old garbage. But her tiredness made her want to get there quickly. It was then that she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, something between a muffled moan and a muffled sob. She stopped in mid-step, frowning. The sound came from an old car, with the windows completely closed and a thick layer of dust on the hood. It seemed abandoned for days, but that sound didn't match the silence around her. Estela approached, hesitantly, her heart racing for no clear reason, or perhaps for all the reasons in the world. Estela pressed her face against the car window, trying to see through the dark film and the accumulated dust. It took a few seconds for her vision to adjust, and for the shock to hit her full on. There in the back seat was a baby, a real baby, small with reddened skin, clothes stuck to his sweaty body and eyes half closed, as if the little life that still remained in him was fading away. Estela stood still for a moment, feeling her stomach churn and her body go cold, even under the scorching sun. She tried to open the door with trembling hands, pulling the handle hard, but it didn't even move. "It's locked," she murmured, as if saying to herself. She started banging on the window, shouting, calling for someone, but there was no one there except her, the dry grass, and the suffocating silence of that forgotten land. The anguish grew quickly, a knot in her chest, an urgency that she didn't know where it came from. She only knew that she needed to get that baby out of there before it was too late. Desperate, Estela ran from one side to the other, trying to find something, anything that could help. She picked up a rock from the ground and tried to break the window, but the rock cracked before the car gave way. She screamed for help, her hoarse voice already starting to fail, but everything around her seemed deaf, immune to the panic that was taking over her. It was then that, when she looked further ahead, she saw a figure hunched over next to a pile of scrap metal. Don Chucho. He was known in the neighborhood for walking around with his wooden cart loaded with scrap metal and talking to himself as if he had invisible company. A man as thin as a dry twig, with small eyes that seemed to see what no one else could see, and hands marked by time and rust. Estela ran to him without thinking twice, almost tripping over her own legs. "Sir, there's a baby trapped in a car. It's dying inside," she shouted, panting. Don Chucho opened his eyes wide, dropped the pliers he was carrying, and went after her without even asking anything else. It was as if the girl's despair had pierced the lonely old man's armor, causing something inside him to awaken as well. Don Chucho was not a man who ran, but at that moment he seemed to be driven by a force that did not come from his legs. With hurried steps and a frowning expression, he followed Estela to the car parked in the sun. All he had to do was look through the window for him to curse under his breath and mutter, "It's an oven in here." Estela, nervous, explained in broken sentences what she had tried to do. The old man wasted no time. He grabbed an iron bar from the nearby scrap, metal and began to hit the side window with all the strength his frail body could muster. Estela flinched with each blow, as if she felt the impact in her own chest. With each blow, she looked at the baby, who now did not even move anymore, his lips cracked and his skin glistening with sweat. When the glass finally shattered, Estela threw herself into the car without hesitation, carefully pulling the baby out, as if she were holding something made of glass. The little one's body was hot as embers, wet and unresponsive. "We have to get him to the hospital now," she shouted, her gaze fixed on his still little face. Don Chucho, without thinking twice, put the baby in his arms and walked towards the nearest avenue where they might be able to get a ride or find someone willing to help. Estela followed alongside, talking to the baby, asking him to hold on, to stay strong, as if her words could keep him awake. Halfway there, a woman who was passing by on a motorcycle stopped when she saw the scene. A child running alongside an old man with a baby in his arms, both covered in sweat and dust. Without even asking much, the woman put them on the back of the bike and headed straight to the neighborhood emergency room. During the ride, Estela couldn't take her eyes off the baby, feeling a fear she had never known. It wasn't fear for herself, it was fear for him, for that tiny, defenseless being whom she didn't even know, but already felt as a part of her. And deep down, maybe, that was exactly it. Somewhere inside her, that baby had already occupied a space that she didn't even know existed. When they arrived at the hospital, everything happened so fast, and yet at the same time, it seemed so slow. Nurses came running, took the baby from Don Chucho's hands and disappeared through a double door, leaving Estela and the old man there, motionless, with their hearts in their throats. No one asked their names. No one wanted to know what they had done. The focus was on saving the baby. Estela stood in the hallway, staring at that closed door as if her entire life were on the other side. Her clothes felt stuck to her body, her throat was dry, her knees were weak. Don Chucho, on the other hand, simply sat on an old bench, took off his grubby hat, and stared at the floor, as if reflecting on some old memory. It was only after a few minutes that a nurse came out to gather information, and upon hearing what Estela had said, immediately called the hospital management. The story was too absurd to ignore. A 12-year-old girl and a scrap metal collector saving a nearly dead baby from an abandoned car. Soon, social worker Rosa was called. She was a woman with a firm presence, with short grey hair that seemed to have been cut with mathematical precision. She carried a notebook and a look that easily saw through lies. When she approached Estela, her expression was that of someone who saw something there that deserved attention. She listened to every detail, patiently, writing everything down without interrupting. Finally, she took a deep breath and said that the baby would be sent to the pediatric intensive care unit, that the police were already being called, and that Estela would have to wait to give a statement. The girl nodded, but she couldn't leave. Something in her refused to leave that hospital. She asked if she could see the baby later, if he would be okay, if he needed anything. Rosa watched her for a moment before answering. "He's alive. Because of you, Estela. Now we need to understand why he was there. And yes, you will be able to see him. This baby deserves to have someone like you around." Estela stayed at the hospital until early evening. She hadn't eaten anything since lunch, but she didn't even feel hungry. Her body was tired, but her head kept spinning non-stop. She looked at the door of the treatment room several times, hoping someone would come out with good news. When the social worker returned, she brought a simple snack and said that the baby was stable, but still under observation. Estela accepted the dry bread and juice and ate slowly, more out of obligation than appetite. Don Chucho had already left, saying he would return the next day to find out the news. Rosa insisted that Estela go home and rest, but the girl hesitated. She was afraid to leave the room, and suddenly everything would disappear, as if the baby were just a strange dream caused by the heat. Rosa then offered her a blanket and let her stay in the lobby of the pediatric ward, in a corner where she could sleep a little. Estela curled up on the wooden bench, looking at the white, silent ceiling, and only fell asleep when she felt that the baby's presence was still there, alive, breathing. The next morning, Estela woke up before sunrise with a sore neck and heavy eyes. The first thing she did was ask about the baby. Rosa showed up shortly after, saying that the baby had spent the night in intensive care, and although he was still weak, he was already responding better. Estela smiled for the first time in 2 days. He asked to see him, and the nurse, after talking to the medical team, allowed a quick visit. When she entered the room, Estela felt her heart race. The baby was in an incubator, with tubes and monitors around him, but his chest rose and fell in a calm rhythm. It was an almost physical relief. She approached slowly, rested her forehead against the glass of the incubator, and just stood there, watching. Without saying anything, without thinking about anything. It was as if, in that moment, all the weight she carried on her shoulders had been lightened just by seeing him breathing. And even though she didn't really understand why, she felt that her life was somehow connected to his. If this part touched you, like and share it with someone who needs to believe in the power of a gesture. When she left the hospital that morning, Estela walked back home at a slower pace than usual. The city was already beginning to pulsate with the noise of buses, vendors opening their stalls, and children running along the sidewalks. But inside her, everything was at a different rhythm, deeper, heavier. When she got home, she found her mother coughing in the same corner as always, with a cup of tea almost cold on the makeshift table. Donna Lourdes tried to smile when she saw her daughter come in, but her face betrayed the accumulated fatigue. Estela knelt down beside the bed and told her everything. Every detail, every gesture, every emotion. The mother listened in silence, squeezing her daughter's hand with her thin fingers, and when she finished her story, tears ran discreetly down the woman's face. "You saved a life, my daughter," she said, her voice choked. "No one can take that away from you." Estela shook her head, still not knowing exactly what to feel. The feeling of having done something great was mixed with a strange fear of everything that could still happen. In the following days, Estela continued to visit the hospital whenever she could. She would come with sweets in her basket, make a few sales in the morning, and then go straight to see the baby. The staff already knew her by name, and some even smiled when they saw her arrive, as if she were part of something bigger there. The baby, who still didn't have a name, was starting to show signs of recovery. He moved his arms more vigorously, cried more vigorously, and even opened his eyes for a few seconds. When Estela was near, it was as if he recognized something familiar in her, a smell, a tone of voice, a safe presence. With each visit, the bond between the two grew stronger. Estela sang softly, told stories she had made up on the spot, and stayed there for hours without saying anything, just looking. And the more time passed, the harder it was to imagine herself being away from him. It was an attachment that grew without asking permission, without a name, without logic, but it was real as anything she had ever felt in her life. Have you ever felt this kind of inexplicable connection with someone? Comment below. It was on the 4th day after the rescue that things began to take a different turn. Estela had just arrived at the hospital, as she always did, when she was surprised by a strange movement at the reception. 2 men in ties were talking to Rosa and the director of the unit. They were serious, tense, with that air of people who are carrying orders and not doubting. When Estela approached, Rosa took her aside and explained. A man had shown up that morning claiming to be the baby's father. He said his name was Ramiro and that he had lost his son in an accident and had been desperate ever since. But his version of events did not match the facts. There was no police report, nor had anyone searched for the child in the previous days. Furthermore, the documents he presented seemed questionable, to say the least. Rosa calmly told her everything, but Estela felt a chill run down the back of her neck. There was something strange about that man, even though she had not seen him yet. It was as if her body knew what her mind still did not fully understand. That man was hiding something. That same day, Estela saw Ramiro for the first time. He was sitting in one of the chairs in the hallway, talking loudly on the phone, with abrupt gestures and an impatient look in his eyes. He had a scruffy beard, overly slicked hair, and a strong perfume that filled the air. When he saw Estela pass by, he stared at her for a few seconds, with a forced smile that seemed more like a warning than a sign of sympathy. The girl looked away, uncomfortable. After that encounter, the atmosphere in the hospital changed. The medical team became more cautious, Rosa began to take even more accurate notes, and Officer Gutierrez was assigned to follow the case. Estela began to notice details. The way Ramiro changed his tone of voice depending on who was around, the questions he asked about schedules, the glances he cast toward the room where the baby was. She couldn't explain it in words, but she could feel it, and what she felt was that this man wasn't there for the love of his son. He was there for some other much more obscure reason. Ramiro's visits became frequent and increasingly uncomfortable. He would show up at random times, ask too many questions, and show an unreasonable rush to take the baby away, even though the recovery was not yet complete. Estela, who at first would just watch from a distance, began to pay more attention to everything he said. During one of the visits, she heard him complain about the delay in the process of releasing the child and insinuated that he would resolve this with more influential people. That sounded strange, almost like a veiled threat. On another occasion, he tried to touch the baby even without the team's permission, and when he was reprimanded by a nurse, he left angrily, muttering something about people who act like judges. Estela realized that she wasn't the only one who was suspicious. Officer Gutierrez was also showing signs of discomfort, taking discreet notes and having long conversations with Rosa in the hallways. The atmosphere was tense, and although no one said anything openly, everyone there knew that there was more to this case than a simple, careless abandonment. Then a new piece of the puzzle appeared. Bruno, a mechanic who worked near the lot where the car was abandoned. He contacted the police after seeing a brief story on the local news about the baby's rescue. He said he recognized the car from its description and claimed that he had seen Ramiro driving the same vehicle a few weeks earlier. He even gave details of the license plate, the model, and a strange conversation he had overheard when Ramiro was arguing with another man about changing the trunk before the next delivery. This information immediately raised alarm bells. From that point on, the investigation gained momentum. The car was not just a makeshift hiding place for the baby, it was part of something much bigger. With Bruno's help, the police found records of irregular sales and counterfeit invoices associated with the vehicle. The suspicion that the baby had been left there out of pure carelessness began to fade. In its place, a darker theory emerged. Perhaps the baby had been discarded because he was getting in the way of some dirty business. As research progressed, tensions increased considerably. Ramiro became increasingly aggressive. During one of his visits to the hospital, he argued with the receptionist because he was not allowed to enter the pediatric ICU unaccompanied. When Rosa tried to calmly intervene, he indirectly threatened her, saying that nosy people also end up disappearing. That was the last straw. Gutierrez began to accompany him closely on all visits and reinforce the police presence in the area outside the hospital. Estela, even though she was just a girl, sensed the danger approaching, like someone who feels a cold wind before a storm. At the same time, she refused to leave the baby. Her bond with that child was stronger than her fear. She spent more time next to the incubator than in her own home. She took small cloths embroidered by her mother, made colorful origami to decorate the baby's corner, and even wrote a note, stuck with adhesive tape to the side of the crib. "You are strong. Hold on tight. I'm here." Meanwhile, Donna Lourdes' health began to deteriorate. Her cough became more frequent, her fatigue increased, and the medicines no longer seemed to have the same effect. Estela divided her time between taking care of her mother, visiting the baby, and even trying to sell some sweets to provide basic needs at home. The physical fatigue was visible, but the emotional pain was even worse. There were days when she felt like lying down and disappearing for a while, just to breathe without that tightness in her chest. But she couldn't. She was the foundation of the house, the only support, the link between survival and helplessness. And even with all that, she never thought about abandoning the baby. There was something bigger going on, something she couldn't explain, but she felt it. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was love, or maybe it was just the fact that for the first time she felt that her existence could make a real difference in someone's life. If you're feeling something while reading this, maybe it's time to follow the page. Social worker Rosa, aware of Estela's efforts and dedication, began discussing with the hospital's medical and legal teams the possibility of placing the baby under the temporary custody of the girl and her mother. At first glance, the idea seemed unthinkable. After all, she was a teenager taking care of another child in a precarious environment. But Rosa saw beyond the protocols. She saw something rare in Estela's eyes, something that cannot be learned in any book: genuine commitment. And more than that, she saw a painful absence, the lack of support, of structure, of someone to lend a hand to this girl who was doing everything on her own. The proposal was taken to the judge in charge of the case, who authorized a technical visit to Estela's home to assess the possibility of temporary custody. The report made clear the extreme simplicity of the home, but also something even stronger: care, organization, and affection, despite the scarce resources. The decision, although controversial, was approved with restrictions. The baby could remain under the care of Estela and Donna Lourdes, but the hospital and the Guardianship Council would maintain continuous monitoring. When Estela received the news that she could take the baby home temporarily, she was speechless. She looked at Rosa, then at the judge, then at the baby, as if she wanted to confirm if it was really real. She left the hospital with him in her arms, wrapped in a borrowed blue blanket and with a small backpack of supplies donated by the infirmary. The path home seemed different. Each step was a mixture of fear and joy. When she entered through the wooden door of her house, she felt as if the space had been transformed. Even with the peeling walls and the strong smell of her mother's medicine, that room was now also a home for that baby. Donna Lourdes held the little one in her arms with trembling hands and smiled, a tired smile, but full of tenderness. Estela made a special corner in the room with a cardboard box lined with blankets, improvising a crib with what she had. And that night, for the first time in weeks, she slept with a peaceful heart. In the following days, Estela's house became a different world. Despite all the difficulties, there was a new energy in the air, as if that child brought with her a silent force capable of changing the atmosphere of the place. Estela woke up even earlier, now to make her mother's coffee, check if the baby was okay, and then go out into the streets with her basket of sweets. But something had changed in the way she walked. She was no longer just a girl selling to survive. She was a girl who cared for someone. In the alleys and squares, people began to notice this. Donna Closa, who sold empanadas on the corner of the market, started to set aside an extra package for Estela. So Nivaldo, the newspaper vendor, would leave a glass of fresh water and say, "You're doing something beautiful, girl. God bless you." And she would smile shyly, not knowing how to react to so much affection. It was strange to be seen not only as a poor saleswoman, but as someone who inspired respect. But like almost everything in Estela's life, this new phase also brought risks. One night, when she was walking home with an empty basket and sore feet, she noticed a shadow standing on the corner, leaning against a lamppost. It was Ramiro. He didn't say anything right away. He just stood there watching. When she passed him, he spoke softly, but sharply. "Do you think this will last? People like you have no place in this kind of story." Estela didn't answer. She just kept walking, her heart racing and her eyes alert to the sounds around her. In the following days, she began to notice that she was being followed. A black car would always park near the hospital when she went to visit Rosa. A strange woman tried to strike up a conversation near the fruit stand, asking where she lived. Estela told the social worker everything, who, worried, called Gutierrez again. The police began to act more cautiously. The threat was no longer just a suspicion, it was taking shape, and the danger was getting closer and closer. It was during a silent night that fear became real. Estela woke up to a sharp noise coming from the front door, as if someone was trying to force her inside. She stood still for a few seconds, listening intently. The baby was sleeping in the corner, wrapped in a yellow blanket, and Dona Lourdes was coughing softly. On the other side of the room, suddenly she heard the lock click and the wood creak as it gave way. Someone was really trying to get in. Without thinking, Estela picked up the baby in her arms and ran to the small bathroom in the back, locking herself inside. She heard heavy footsteps, a man's voice mumbling something inaudible, and the sound of drawers being turned over. It didn't take long for the person to leave, but the damage was done. The door was broken, their few belongings were scattered on the floor, and most importantly, the certainty that they were no longer safe there. Estela left trembling, with the baby pressed to her chest and her eyes full of tears. It was as if, once again, life was trying to remind her that happiness was not a guaranteed right. The next day, Rosa showed up with Gutierrez. Both were visibly shaken when they saw the state of the house. The invasion was reported as an attempt at intimidation with a possible direct connection to Ramiro. The decision was immediate. Estela, Dona Lourdes, and the baby would be taken to a safe shelter until the police concluded the operation against those involved. The girl resisted at first. She didn't want to leave her home, her neighborhood, her routine. But Rosa was firm. "It's for safety, Estela. You did a lot for him. Now we need to protect you too." So they left with a few things in improvised bags. The shelter was simple but clean, with separate beds and food provided. For the first time in a long time, Estela slept without fear that someone would break down the door during the night. Still, the anguish of being far from her reality weighed heavily. The sound of the streets, the smell of the market, the familiar faces, all of this now seemed distant. And even though she was safe, she carried in her chest the doubt that worried her the most. Would she be able to keep the baby by her side until the end? Time at the shelter passed strangely, slow on the outside, but sped up on the inside. Estela tried to maintain some sort of routine, even though everything there was new and impersonal. She would get up early, help her mother, prepare the baby's milk, and improvise toys with scraps of paper and bottle caps. Despite the circumstances, the bond between her and the little boy only grew stronger. He would smile when he saw her, stretch his arms out to her lap, and be soothed by her voice. It was as if he knew that there was protection, affection, and presence there. Estela, in turn, began to refer to him as our boy without realizing it. It was an affection that escaped naturally, without the need for an official name, certificate, or legal bond. It was true love, born of care, dedication, and daily coexistence. And even Rosa, who maintained a certain professional rigidity, already referred to that relationship with respect, seeing in it a connection that went beyond any bureaucracy. Meanwhile, the investigation was gaining momentum. New complaints were collected, and a smuggling ring began to be dismantled. The car in which the baby had been found was part of a series of vehicles used to transport illegal goods, unregistered medicines, electronics of dubious origin, and in some cases, even forged documents. Ramiro was at the center of this web. His name appeared on fraudulent invoices, suspicious transactions, and wiretaps. Gutierrez, determined to put an end to this cycle, worked with his team to organize an operation to arrest everyone involved at once. While the police officers devised strategies, Rosa took care to protect Estela and her family from possible retaliation. She knew that even with mounting evidence, the danger still existed, and at the same time, she worked to ensure that, when it was all over, The baby would not end up in some shelter. Rosa saw in Estela and Donna Lourdes not just survivors. She saw in them a family that had been born by fate and that deserved to stay together. The day of the operation arrived with a cloudy sky, as if even the weather could sense the tension in the air. Estela was still sleeping when Rosa showed up at the shelter, her expression more serious than usual. She informed her that Ramiro would be arrested that morning and that the entire network was about to collapse. She also said that there might be news in the newspapers, that some familiar faces might appear on television, and that Estela's name would be kept confidential, but that the impact of all this would be great. The girl listened in, silence, holding the baby in her arms, feeling a strange relief mixed with fear of what would come next. It was the end of a dangerous chapter, but also the beginning of a future that was still uncertain. Rosa held her hand and said firmly, "You have done more than many grown-ups out there, and now you will be able to breathe in peace." Estela didn't answer. She just looked at the baby and held him to her chest, as if that were enough. Hours later, the news spread. Ramiro was arrested while trying to flee with false documents and money hidden in the back of a car. Other members of the scheme were also detained. The police found enough evidence to dismantle the entire operation, including documents that confirmed that the baby had not been left in the car by accident, but by deliberate decision. He was a hindrance, an unwanted distraction for someone who treated lives as extra weight. When Estela heard this, she felt a chill down her spine, knowing that the child would have died. For convenience, if it hadn't been for chance or fate crossing her path, made her understand the gravity of everything she had experienced. Rosa returned to the shelter at the end of the day with tears in her eyes, holding an envelope with documents and a restrained smile on her face. "The judge wants to talk to you and your mother tomorrow morning. It's about final custody. I think he wants to hear from you what I've known for a long time." Estela felt her heart beat differently. For the first time, he saw the real possibility that that baby would, in fact, be part of his life forever. The next morning, Estela put on her best clothes, a faded pink blouse and a skirt that was already too short, but it was the most presentable one she had. Donna Lourdes, even though she was weak, made sure to comb her daughter's hair and tie it with a ribbon that had been kept for a long time. Rosa stopped by the shelter early and took the two of them to the courthouse. The building was large, with cold hallways full of hurried footsteps, and Estela felt small there, as if she were in a place where she didn't belong. But when he entered the judge's room, something changed. He was a man with a serene expression, with tired but kind eyes. He asked them to sit down, looked directly at Estela and said, "You saved a life, and that is worth more than any diploma I've ever seen." He asked about the routine with the baby, how she dealt with the daily care, and what the relationship between him and Donna Lourdes was like. Estela answered everything simply, without embellishments, just saying what she did for love every day, without expecting anything in return. The judge listened attentively, sometimes taking notes, sometimes just observing. When Donna Lourdes spoke, even though her voice was weak, she moved everyone in the room. She said that despite her health limitations, she felt alive again with that baby close by, that she had found strength just by seeing him there every day. At the end, the judge stood up, went to the window and remained silent for a few seconds. When he returned to the table, he said firmly, "What defines a family is not blood, it is care, presence, dedication, and you have already proven that you have all of these." He asked for a few days to complete the legal procedures, but he said in advance that in his view, that baby already belonged to that house, to that story. Estela left the room with her eyes shining. It was not a definitive confirmation, yet but for the first time she felt that the world was beginning, little by little, to recognize what she had known since the first moment she held that little one in her arms. He was hers, and she was his. In the following days, while they awaited the official decision, Estela returned home with her mother and baby. The door had been repaired with the help of the community itself, which had come together in a silent gesture of solidarity. Mr. Nivaldo, the newspaper vendor, brought a new hinge. Mrs. Clouser helped clean and reorganize the small space. Even the street children, who had previously not even noticed her existence, carried bricks and painted one of the walls with donated paint. The neighborhood, accustomed to silent tragedies, this time seemed to want to be part of something good. Estela watched everything with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. She had never felt so much belonging. She never imagined that her story could cause this kind of mobilization. She continued, selling sweets now with the baby strapped tightly to her body like an improvised kangaroo. And incredible as it may seem, her sales increased. Maybe because people wanted to help. Maybe because of the tenderness of the image of the girl with the baby in her arms. Maybe simply because finally she had conquered a new space in the world. Rosa continued to visit them weekly, closely monitoring the child's development and the care provided by Estela and Donna Lourdes. At each visit, she filled out reports, but what really moved her was the feeling of being in front of something rare, a family that had been built in the absence of everything except the essentials. The baby, now informally called Luis, a name chosen by Donna Lourdes in honor of Estela's paternal grandfather, grew strong, smiling, curious. He began to babble, grasped objects firmly, and calmed down whenever he heard Estela's voice. She, in turn, could no longer imagine her life without him. It was as if through that relationship, she was also healing parts of herself that had been dormant until then. Every cry she comforted, every bottle she prepared, every diaper she changed, all of this gave her meaning. And deep down, perhaps this was the greatest discovery of all. It was not just her who was taking care of Luis. He was also, somehow, taking care of her. The adoption was made official on a normal day, without ceremony or fanfare, but full of meaning. Rosa showed up in the morning with an envelope in her hands and a different smile. Estela was in the backyard washing clothes when she saw her approaching. She dried her hands on her skirt and ran to help her without imagining what was coming. Rosa came in, greeted Donna Lourdes, and then handed the envelope to the girl. "The decision has been made," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. Estela opened the paper with trembling hands and read it slowly, as if each word needed to be absorbed carefully. Permanent custody granted to the family of the minor Estela Lima dos Santos. She didn't understand everything at first, but when Rosa confirmed it with a simple, "He is yours officially now," Estela felt her legs give way. She sat down slowly on the wooden chair and for a few seconds said nothing. She just smiled. That smile that doesn't fit on the face, that comes from the soul, the one that not even suffering can erase. Luis, in his mother's arms, let out a little cry, as if he knew too. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Neighbors came to congratulate her. Some brought used clothes, simple toys, and jars of food. Everything took on enormous value at that moment. Estela's story had spread far beyond the street corners she used to visit with her sweets. It even reached a small community newspaper, which published an article with the title, "Girl Saves Baby," and becomes a symbol of love and courage. The text was simple, but true. It spoke of her routine, her daily struggle, and the gesture that changed everything. And most importantly, it showed how, even in poverty, there is greatness. Estela did not feel like a heroine. She continued to wake up early, take care of her mother, change diapers, and prepare brigadeiros. But now she did everything with a different certainty. She had changed a life, and without realizing it, she had also changed her own. Adoption did not bring wealth, comfort, or miracles, but it did bring meaning. It brought peace, and that, for her, was already much more than she had ever dreamed of. Even with permanent custody, the challenges did not disappear. Life continued to be demanding. Donna Lourdes had good days and very bad days when she could barely get out of bed. Estela had to learn to balance her tasks even more, Between taking care of the baby, preparing sweets, helping her mother, and, whenever possible, attending classes at the community school. It was during this period that teacher Juliana, a sweet woman with always attentive eyes and a firm voice, began to pay more attention to Estela. She knew about her story, of course, but she saw something even stronger in her, a silent intelligence, a rare sensitivity. She called the girl to talk, offered help with her studies, encouraged her to dream bigger. She told her that she could be whatever she wanted, a nurse, a teacher, a psychologist, and that caring for others could be a vocation, yes, but it could also be a career. Estela listened to everything with a mixture of enthusiasm and disbelief. It was still difficult to imagine a future that did not involve just surviving, but those conversations planted seeds. Estela began to study with more dedication, even between feeding bottles and sleepless nights. She took Luis with her to class whenever she could, and the school gradually adapted to this new routine. The principal freed up a corner with a carpet and toys, improvised as a nursery, and the other students began to help spontaneously. It was common to see Luis on the lap of a teenager while Estela did math problems. That school became an extension of her home and of her history. Estela began to see studying as a real chance to build something different for the future, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. She wanted to guarantee her son, and now she definitely called him that, a better life than the one she had. She wanted to give him a wider world with more open doors. And above all, she wanted to prove to herself that she was capable, that she was not just a survivor. She was also someone who could flourish. Time passed, and with it, Luis grew. He was already walking around the house with stumbling steps, speaking in single words and laughing easily. He had a curious, attentive manner, as if everything was new and worthy of being explored. And for him, it really was. Estela watched him with a look of mixed admiration and responsibility. Each new achievement of the boy was also a personal victory. When he said "Mommy" for the first time, there was no doubt who he was calling. And she, without holding back her tears, felt a silent confirmation of everything she had been experiencing since that day she met him in the car. He recognized her as his mother, not because of genetics, but because of the bond built with sweat, affection, and presence. It was also during this period that Estela began to write a small notebook of memories. She had not been in the habit of writing before, but she felt the need to record everything, every important moment with Luis, every difficulty overcome, every simple detail that deserved to be remembered. It was like creating a time capsule for the future, so that one day he would know where he came from, who took him in, and how love saved his life. One night, after putting Luis to bed and making her mother's tea, Estela sat on the floor with her notebook on her lap and began to write about the first day she saw him. She described everything in detail: the heat, the muffled sound, the fogged-up glass, the feeling in her chest when she realized there was a life inside. As she wrote, she realized that that moment had undoubtedly been a turning point, not only because of the heroic act, but because of what it had provoked within her. Estela was no longer just a girl who sold candy to survive. She was someone who, even without knowing it, carried within her an enormous strength, a capacity to love that overflowed even in the most adverse scenarios. She closed the notebook carefully, as if she were keeping a precious secret, and looked at the room where Luis slept. She smiled to herself with the serenity of someone who, despite everything, had found what she was most looking for, a meaning to carry on. The scars of the past were still there. Estela knew that not everything disappeared with time. Sometimes, all it took was a loud noise at night for memories of the invasion to come back, or a strange car parked on the corner for her heart to race. But even so, she kept going. She had learned to live with the scars without letting them stop her from taking the next step. This was what life was all about, moving on, even when she was afraid, and she kept going. Between one bottle and another, between schoolwork and caring for her mother, she found strength where she never imagined she had. Some nights were difficult. Luis had a fever, Donna Lourdes was weaker, the bills were piling up. But there were also mornings when the boy would wake up laughing, holding her face with his little hands, and it was all worth it. Those hands, so fragile, had the power to calm any storm. They were little anchors in a sea that was sometimes still too rough. One late afternoon, while sweeping the yard, Estela saw Rosa arriving once again. The social worker was already part of the family, and her presence always brought something new. That day, she brought unexpected news. An NGO that supports teenage mothers had learned about Estela's story through an article published in the community newspaper. They wanted to meet her, offer support, scholarships, and a possible internship opportunity. Estela didn't know what to say. She had never thought about working in an office, much less in social services. But Rosa insisted, "They saw in you exactly what I saw from the beginning. You didn't just save a baby. You represent what many girls live in silence, and your story can inspire others." Estela accepted the invitation shyly, not knowing what to expect. But something inside her told her that this was the beginning of a new stage. Not a break, but a continuation. A step that showed that, despite her humble origins, she could reach places that previously seemed unreachable. The first visit to the NGO was something completely out of Estela's comfort zone. The building was modern, with colorful walls and rooms full of books, computers, and people speaking words she didn't know very well. Even so, she was welcomed with a warmth she hadn't expected. The coordinator, a woman named Selma, treated her with so much respect that Estela, for a moment, felt like an adult. They talked about their routine, their dreams, their difficulties. Selma listened to her with real attention, not with that distant look so many adults used to have when they spoke to her. At the end of the meeting, they offered Estela a basic course in administration and another in family assistance, with guaranteed transportation and a small monthly allowance. It seemed unbelievable. For the first time, someone offered something without demanding anything in return, without distrust, without charity disguised as pity. It was recognition. It was an opportunity. Estela went home with a full heart and trembling hands, holding the course brochure as if it were a golden ticket to a different life. Over time, she began attending the course twice a week. Luis stayed with Donna Lourdes, or, on some days, the NGO itself provided a caregiver. Estela fell in love with the idea of helping other girls who, like her, were thrown into adult life before their time. She learned about foster care, early care for babies, active listening, and even how to fill out social forms. It was in this environment that she found new references, new voices, new possibilities. She was no longer just the girl from the neighborhood who saved a baby. She was someone who could teach, who could build something bigger. And this shook everything inside her. She began writing small booklets in simple language for first-time mothers, using her own experiences as a basis. And to her surprise, the materials were well received. The coordinator even suggested that she help organize discussion groups. Estela never imagined that one day she would lead a group. But there she was, talking about motherhood, empathy, courage, and new beginnings, with a determination that she didn't even know she had. The conversation circles became one of Estela's favorite moments. At first, her voice was low, almost shy. But as soon as she started telling her story, everyone would stop talking and listen attentively. There was something powerful in her words, perhaps because they didn't come from books, but from real-life experiences, from the scars of everyday life. Other girls began to open up too, sharing fears, doubts, and pains that they had previously kept silent. Estela listened with the same care that Rosa once had with her. With each meeting, she felt something inside her mature. She wasn't just a girl who took care of a baby. She was a young woman with experience, with purpose, with a voice, and that changed everything. One day, after one of these circles, one of the participants hugged her and said, "You made me believe that it's possible to get out of the depths of despair." Estela never forgot that phrase. It was as if somehow her pain had gained meaning by helping someone else get up. At home, the routine continued to be hectic, but full of life. Luis was increasingly active, curious, and talkative. Estela would laugh to herself when she saw him dancing in the middle of the living room to the sound of a song on the radio or trying to repeat words he heard in conversations. Donna Lourdes, even though her health was still fragile, seemed lighter. Taking care of Luis made her feel alive and present. She sewed little clothes for him with donated fabrics, invented old songs, and made a point of telling him stories before bed. It was as if that baby had brought new life to that house, a silent but powerful breath, and Estela, looking at all that, sometimes found herself standing still, just watching, with a silly smile on her face. It wasn't an easy life, but it was a life full of meaning, a life that, even without luxury, overflowed with love on all sides. One day, at the end of a class, Selma handed Estela an envelope that was different from the others. Inside was an invitation to participate as a speaker at a regional event held by the NGO itself, which would bring together several social support institutions. Estela stood still for a few seconds, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "Speaker? Me?" she asked with a nervous laugh. Selma just smiled and said, "Yes, because you have something to tell, and the world needs to hear it." The event would take place in a large auditorium with a microphone, an audience, and other people who, like her, had remarkable stories to share. Estela thought about refusing. She felt a strange fear of not knowing how to express herself, of freezing up in front of so many people. But when she got home and told Donna Lourdes, she was surprised by her mother's reaction. Even though she was tired, she held her hand tightly and said, "Go, my daughter. Go show the world who you are." And that was how, between fear and courage, Estela began to prepare her speech. Without memorized paper, without a rehearsed speech, just with her heart full of memories. The day of the event arrived, and with it, a mixture of anxiety and pride. Estela took Luis with her, dressed in the most beautiful outfit they had. When she went up on stage, the auditorium was already full. The microphone was shaking a little in her hands, but her voice was firm from the beginning. She talked about her difficult childhood, about her sick mother, about the sweets on the streets, about the day she heard a sound coming from inside a car. And with each passage, the audience became even more silent. Estela did not speak like an expert. She spoke like someone who had survived, like someone who transformed pain into strength and abandonment into acceptance. At the end, she received a standing ovation, and at that moment, for the first time, she truly understood the impact of her own story. It was as if until then, everything had been lived in silence. But now, her voice echoed, and she knew that she would never be silent again. After the event, Estela began to receive invitations from other institutions, small groups, public, schools, neighborhood associations. Everyone wanted to hear that girl who had turned tragedy into love, but she kept her feet on the ground. She never stopped selling her sweets, never gave up being present in Luis's care, and she never let the compliments take her away from her reality. For her, all of that was important, of course, but the essentials were still at home. Brewed coffee in the morning, clean diapers on time, hot tea for her mother at night. This simplicity was what kept her going, and yet it was beautiful to see how her voice was reaching places that were previously unthinkable. At one of these lectures, a university professor approached her and asked if she had ever thought about going to college. Estela laughed, almost in disbelief. "College? I barely finished elementary school." But the professor insisted. She said that there were scholarships, preparatory courses, psychological support. She said that stories like hers deserved more space within formal education. Estela spent days thinking about it. She talked to Rosa, Selma, and teacher Juliana. They were all unanimous. She should try. And so she began to study in a more organized, focused, and determined way. She set aside her mornings for studying, her afternoons for her class, and her evenings for her homework. Luis, still young, learned to respect his mother's time. He played nearby, slept next to his notebooks, and pointed to the letters in his books as if he were part of the process. It was a demanding routine, but full of purpose. Estela no longer saw the future as something distant. Now it had a shape, a name, and a direction. Each equation solved, each text read, was a step in the construction of a new life. And for the first time, she didn't do it just to survive. She did it because she believed she deserved it, that she could, and that she had, within herself, a strength that the world was now beginning to recognize. Preparing for the college entrance exam became a new chapter in Estela's life. She knew that the competition was high, that many candidates had expensive prep courses, access to better materials, and support at home. But she still wasn't intimidated. What she lacked in structure, she made up for in discipline. She created a schedule with the help of her teacher Juliana, posted it on the classroom wall, and followed it religiously. Math on Mondays, essay writing on Tuesdays, science on Wednesdays, and so on. Luis, now almost 3 years old, was beginning to understand that this time was important. He would sit next to her with his own colored pencils, drawing while his mother immersed herself in her books. And there was something beautiful about it, a silent complicity, an invisible exchange of strength between the two. When Estela got tired, she would look at him and remember why she was trying. It wasn't just for a diploma, it was for everything they could build together, for a future different from what the world had in store. In for them. One night, while she was reviewing a handout, Estela heard Luis calling for his grandmother insistently. When she got to the room, she found Donna Lourdes lying down, pale, panting, with her eyes half closed. She was immediately shocked. She called a neighbor, ran to the nearest pharmacy, and called Rosa. Her mother was rushed to the hospital and diagnosed with a worsening lung condition. The doctors were clear. She needed intensive care, constant oxygen, and daily monitoring. Estela felt the ground disappear for a few moments. Everything seemed to collapse at the same time, but even with her chest tight, she did not allow herself to weaken. She divided her time between the hospital and her studies, took Luis with her on visits, and asked the NGO for help to take care of him on the most difficult days. And even though she cried at night, hiding in her pillow, she never failed to do what she set out to do, because she knew that her mother needed her to be strong. And I knew, more than ever, that moving forward was also a way of honoring everything they had experienced up until then. The following months were intense, as if everything had accelerated at the same time. Estela divided her days between the hospital, her studies, and caring for Luis. She slept little, ate poorly, but she kept going. With each improvement in her mother, she felt a breath of hope. With each setback, a sinking feeling in her chest. Even so, she remained focused. Professor Juliana continued to monitor her progress, bringing extra exercises, reviews, and even tips on mental organization for the most demanding days. Estela wrote everything down, absorbing every word, as if each sheet of paper were a step on the ladder she was climbing. Luis, in turn, grew up smart, observant, and affectionate. It was common to see him walking down the hospital corridors with a smile on his face, showing sympathy to the nurses. He seemed to have inherited that silent sensitivity from Estela, the ability to see beyond pain, to make her presence a relief for others. One day, during one of her visits to the hospital, Donna Lourdes called Estela to the bedside with a weak gesture. Estela held her hand, feeling her skin colder than usual. Her mother smiled with that gentle look that only she had and said, "You have become everything I never imagined I could see. You have become strength. You have become roots. You have become a path." Estela could not hold back her tears. They remained there in silence for a few minutes, just looking at each other, as if they wanted to keep that moment forever. A little later, Her mother fell asleep, and Estela sat next to her, thinking about everything they had experienced. That night, when she returned home with Luis in her arms, she felt a strange mixture of sadness and peace. It was as if a part of her knew that her mother's cycle was ending. And even though it hurt, even though her chest tightened, there was also an immense gratitude for everything Donna Lourdes had represented. She had been more than a mother. She had been a shelter, an example, and above all, a foundation. And Estela, even without knowing what tomorrow would bring, felt ready to continue. Not long after that night, Donna Lourdes passed away. It was a silent mourning without fanfare, as she had always been in life. Estela was by her side, holding her hand until her last breath. There were no desperate cries or screams. There was a deep, heavy, but serene silence. It was as if Estela was already preparing herself inside, even though she didn't want to admit it. The wake was simple, organized with the help of neighbors and the NGO. Rosa was there. Selma was there too, as was teacher Juliana and several people from the neighborhood. Estela held Luis in her arms the whole time, as if he were the anchor that kept her from sinking into grief, and in a way, he was. During the burial, while everyone threw flowers on the coffin, Luis stretched his little hand to the sky and mumbled a word that sounded like "Grandma." Estela smiled through her tears. That was a comfort, a last touch of connection between generations, a symbolic closure, a beautiful farewell within the pain. In the following days, the emptiness in the house was evident. Her mother's singing, the carefully prepared teas, the bedtime stories, everything was now a memory. But Estela decided that she would not let that grief become an eternal burden. She used the longing as fuel. She resumed her studies with even more strength, as if each page were a step in paying homage to her mother. She spent entire afternoons solving problems, reviewing content, practicing essays. Luis, curious as always, observed everything carefully, asked what those difficult words were, played with the pencils, and smiled when he saw his mother concentrating. It was as if, even without understanding, he knew that it was important. And Estela, with all the pain she carried, felt more alive than ever. She had lost a part of herself, but she was not lost. On the contrary, she felt stronger, more connected to her purpose. Now, she was the one who needed to be the foundation, and she was ready for it. The long-awaited day of the college entrance exam arrived. Estela woke up early, made a simple coffee, and put on the smartest clothes she had. She left Luis with a trusted neighbor and left with her backpack on her back and a mix of nervousness and excitement in her chest. It was as if each step to the exam location was the materialization of all the efforts made up until that point. When she arrived, she looked around and saw students of all ages, some accompanied by their parents, others in prep school clothes and sophisticated materials. For a moment, she felt small again, but all she had to do was remember everything she had faced to pull herself together. She took a deep breath, entered the room, and sat down. When the proctor handed out the exam, Estela held the pen firmly. She started with the easiest questions, then moved on to the more complex ones, and even in moments of doubt, she remained calm. She knew that each question was just another challenge among so many that she had already overcome in life. The essay was the last item, the topic, the importance of empathy in social relations. Estela smiled as she read it. It seemed like that proposal had been made especially for her. She wrote fluently, with emotion, with truth. She didn't quote theorists or sociologists. She spoke about real life. She talked about the experience of welcoming someone, about seeing the other beyond appearances, about building bonds even in the midst of pain. And at the end, she signed with the same name she had written so many times on the Brigadeiro sheets and on the notes she left on Luis's crib, Estela Lima dos Santos. He left the room with his head held high and his heart light. Regardless of the score, I knew I had already won, because at that moment, more than taking a test, I had made a delivery, a summary of everything she had become, and that for her was already the greatest approval of all. The college entrance exam results came out weeks later, on a random morning, one of those when Estela was already busy with 1,000 tasks. She had just hung the clothes on the line when she received a message from Professor Juliana. "The list is out! Have you looked yet?" Her heart raced. She ran to her cell phone, typed with trembling fingers, and accessed the university website. The pages took a long time to load, as if time wanted to play with her anxiety. Finally, the list appeared. Estela scanned it quickly, without even breathing properly, until she found her name. Estela Lima dos Santos. Approved. Social assistance. Full scholarship. She froze for a few seconds. She read and reread it about 4 times, as if doubting her own vision. Then she screamed, unable to contain herself. A full, loud scream that echoed through the street and made her neighbor run out of the door in fright. Estela was crying and laughing at the same time. Luis came running, and she hugged him tightly, twirling around in the backyard as if the world had become lighter. At that moment, everything made sense. Every sleepless night, every candy sale, every hidden tear, it had all led to this. The news spread quickly. The community school made a poster with her name. The NGO organized a small celebration, and even the local radio station reported her approval. Rosa showed up with simple flowers and said, "You are the pride of all of us." Selma brought an improvised cake, and teacher Juliana cried more than Estela. The girl who saved a baby was now a college student. And not just any college student, a future social worker, ready to give back to the world everything she had once received. Estela was still aware that the journey would be long. She knew she would have to juggle studies, work, and motherhood. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was just surviving. She was building. She was creating a path where before there had been only rubble. And even with fear, even with uncertainty, she kept going, because now she knew that her story was more than pain. It was an example, it was strength, it was a beginning. The first day at university was a new milestone in Estela's life. She arrived early, accompanied by Luis, who held her hand tightly and looked around curiously. The campus was huge, full of buildings, trees, and all kinds of people walking around. Estela felt butterflies in her stomach, similar to the ones she had on the day of the exam, but now there was a different glow in her eyes, the glow of someone who belonged there. Some people looked at her strangely when they saw a student with a child in her arms, but others smiled, made room, and offered help. Estela was welcomed by the seniors, received her student badge, saw the classroom, and sat in the front row, as she always did at school. When the professor came in and started talking about the course, she looked at everything with almost sacred attention. It was a dream under construction, and, despite the difficulties, she knew that this was the beginning of a new cycle, not only for her, but also for Luis. In the first few months, the routine was demanding. Estela divided her time between classes, caring for her son and doing household chores. She slept little, sometimes with her books still open on her lap, but her desire to learn was greater than her tiredness. She participated in class discussions, read the assigned texts carefully, wrote in depth, and listened to everything with the attentive gaze of someone who knows the value of each opportunity. Luis, on the other hand, adapted well. The university daycare offered a welcoming environment, and he soon made friends, learned new songs, and loved to show off the drawings he had made during the day. Estela was proud of him, with every little gesture. It was as if each step they took was a joint progress, a process of double growth in which mother and son learned, developed, and built together. And even on the hardest days, she did not think about giving up, because now she knew that her story was not a coincidence. It was a mission, and it was just beginning. As she progressed in the course, Estela began to stand out. Her teachers noticed her ability to listen, her empathy, and her above-average emotional maturity. It was common to see classmates seeking her out outside of class hours, asking for advice, sharing doubts, and sharing personal stories. Estela never considered herself better than anyone else, but her experience spoke for itself. She had a silent authority, built on experience. Soon, she was invited to participate in an extension project to assist families in vulnerable situations. She accepted without thinking twice. After all, that was what she knew best, to welcome. During the sessions, she listened with the same patience that Rosa had once shown her. She spoke firmly but carefully. She knew exactly how to approach others without intruding, how to build trust over time. And at the end of each meeting, she felt that she was exactly where she should be. During this period, she met Bruno again, the mechanic who had been a key player in the complaint against Ramiro. He showed up at one of the project's activities, invited to share his own experience of collaborating with the justice system. When he saw her, he smiled broadly and said, "I knew you would go far, girl." Estela was moved. They talked for a long time, reminiscing about everything they had experienced during that difficult time, and at the end, he said something that echoed in her head for days. There are people who spend their lives complaining about their luck, but there are people who change the course of their own story by force. You are one of the latter. And it was true. Estela had come to understand, over time, that destiny was not something ready-made. It was something built, even if from broken pieces. And now, looking back, she saw not only the pain, but also the paths she had paved with her own hands. It was a journey made of struggles, yes, but also of choices, courage, and above all, love. It was during one of the outreach project meetings that a new proposal came up to represent the university at a national seminar on public policies for children and youth. The invitation took Estela by surprise. It was a large event attended by renowned researchers, authorities, and representatives from several institutions. When she was nominated by her professors, her first reaction was to back down. She thought she was not yet ready to speak on a stage that size, in front of so many important people. But Selma, who had still been following her career closely, was direct. "You have something that many of them don't have, real experience. You know firsthand what they discuss on paper." Estela thought about it for days before accepting. She talked to Rosa, revisited her old notebook of memories, and decided that yes, she wanted to speak. Not out of vanity, but because she felt she needed to represent all the girls who, like her, experienced early motherhood and social abandonment and, even so, resisted. On the day of the seminar, Estela took Luis with her again. He was now older, more curious and proud of his mother. He sat in the front row with a drawing in his hands, ready to applaud her. Estela went up on stage with the same calm she used to rock her son to sleep at night. She took a deep breath and began her speech, this time more prepared, with slides, data, and references, but without losing the essence. She spoke about how public policies need to be built based on real listening, spoke about the invisible strength of single mothers in the outskirts of cities, and the importance of welcoming without judging. The audience, once again, fell silent. At the end, the applause came again, but this time accompanied by invitations, proposals, and ideas. Estela had no idea that a new door would open, a paid internship position at a municipal agency that supports women in vulnerable situations. She accepted without hesitation. It was the chance to transform even more lives, as someone had once done for her. And so, his story continued to grow, crossing borders, breaking stigmas, and proving every day that love transforms realities. The internship brought a new routine for Estela. Now, in addition to university and motherhood, she divided her time between shifts at the municipal agency, meetings with experienced social workers, and consultations with women who had stories as difficult as hers. It was like diving into a fragmented mirror. Each face she encountered seemed to carry a part of what she had once felt, and this identification made her work even more sensitive, more human. Estela didn't see numbers, she didn't see files. She saw people. When she helped a young mother, in tears, she remembered her own sleepless nights. When she heard stories of abandonment, she remembered the day she had to ask for help without even knowing if she would be heard. And for this reason, her presence in that space became not only necessary, but inspiring. Her older colleagues said that there was something different about her, something that no course could teach, and they were right. Luis continued to be her greatest strength. Even when he was little, he seemed to understand everything with a look. She helped him in her own way, sorting the papers in his mother's backpack, letting him know when it was time to leave, showing him drawings with messages of support. One day, he drew a house with 3 hearts inside and wrote, with the letters still crooked, "Me, Mommy and Grandma in heaven." Estela kept that paper like a treasure. It was more than a drawing. It was proof that her story was already being passed on, not in the form of pain, but of affection. On the weekends, she dedicated herself completely to her son. They would take lunch to the park, fly kites, and read stories together. Estela made a point of creating happy memories for him, different from the ones she had. She wanted Luis to grow up with the certainty that love, care, and presence were a right, not a luxury. And above all, she wanted him to know that his mother was, above all, someone who never gave up. Someone who, even when everything seemed to be falling apart, chose to keep going. As time went by, Estela began to receive invitations to help train new professionals in the field. Universities that were partners of the NGO invited her to participate in roundtables and share her practical experience with social work and psychology students. It was curious how, even though she was still a student, her life experience made many people see her as a role model. She did not let this fool her. She knew she still had a lot to learn, but she could not deny the pride she felt when she looked back and saw how far she had come. At one of these meetings, a teacher told her, "You are not just the future of social work, Estela. You are living proof that well-implemented public policies can change destinies." That kept on going through her mind for days, not out of vanity, but out of responsibility. She knew that her path was not ordinary, and for that very reason, she felt a duty to give back, to pave the way for other girls who would come after her. Luis was growing up fast, and with him, the realization grew that his childhood was completely different from Estela's. He had toys, he was held, he had bedtime stories. There was love overflowing from every corner of the house. Estela made a point of showing her son that he was the fruit of an everyday miracle, not the kind that falls from the sky, but the kind built with courage and persistence. One day, when she was putting him to bed, he asked, "Mommy, how did you find me?" Estela smiled, adjusted the blanket, and replied in a low voice, "I didn't find you, son. You found me." And at that moment, she understood something she had already felt, but had never said out loud. That child had not been just a rescue. He had been a new beginning, a point of light in the midst of darkness, a new meaning for everything she was and everything she still wanted to be. As she progressed through college and became more stable in her internship, Estela began to plan new steps. She was no longer the girl who lived on the spur of the moment. Now she made lists, set goals, and thought in the medium and long term. One of her goals was to get a bigger place to live with Luis. The house where they lived was still small, and although it had a lot of history, it was starting to feel too small for the dreams that were growing inside. She began to save little by little, setting aside part of her internship grant and selling sweets on the weekends, as she had done at the beginning of her journey. But now, things were different. People were buying them not just for the brigadeiros, they were buying them out of admiration, affection, and history. Many asked about Luis, asked about college, and were thrilled with each achievement. And Estela felt that she had created something beyond just a living. She had built a network of affection, a community that truly rooted for her. It was thanks to this network that a few months later, she was able to rent a small 2-room apartment in a new, more organized housing. complex with easy access to daycare and the university. The move was simple, without much furniture, but with a good, fresh energy of a new beginning. Estela insisted on letting Luis help set everything up, choosing where the bed would be, where they would keep the books, where they would hang the drawings on the wall. He was thrilled with every detail, as if he were building a castle. Estela cried alone the first night there, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. Sitting on the floor of the new living room, with Luis sleeping on the makeshift mattress and a pile of still-closed boxes next to her, she finally felt at peace. It was as if, after so many ups and downs, I had found a place where the future could finally begin to be lived peacefully. It wasn't luxury, it wasn't complete comfort, it was dignity. And for her, that was everything. If you've made it this far, show that it was worth it. Like, comment, or share this story. The new home also brought new habits. Estela, who previously lived on a tight schedule, began to allow herself small moments of respite. She created a routine of reading with Luis before bed, retrieving children's books borrowed from the university library. Little by little, she realized how good this was, not only for the boy, but for her as well. It was like a break from the world, a moment where only the two of them existed, the soft voices, the enchanted characters. She also resumed the habit of writing in her notebook, now more frequently, as if her words wanted to record each phase, each lesson learned. One of the most striking passages she wrote said, "Life didn't give me a choice, but it gave me paths. And even without knowing exactly how, I learned to build each step with what I had in my hands." It was a simple sentence, but it was full of everything she had experienced. Luis, with his contagious joy, became the soul of the house. Estela loved watching how he interacted with the world. He made friends with neighbors, played with anything that could be turned into a toy, created incredible stories with his dolls, and always invited his mother to join him in his adventures. One afternoon, while they were washing dishes together, he asked, "Mommy, when I grow up, can I be like you?" Estela smiled, bent down to his eye level, and answered firmly, "You can be whoever you want, my love. But if you are someone who cares for others, who is fair, and who loves with all their heart, then yes, you will be just like me." And at that moment, she felt that all the effort, all the journey she had traveled had been worth it, not because she had overcome difficulties, but because she was raising a better human being, and that was, perhaps, her greatest victory. Little by little, Estela began to be invited to officially represent the university in municipal public policy forums and councils. It was an immense responsibility, but one that she welcomed naturally. She knew that her presence in these spaces was not only a personal achievement, but also an opening for other voices like hers. Whenever she spoke, she made a point of remembering her origins. She did not use difficult words or try to appear different from what she was. She spoke with the truth of someone who had been on the other side, waiting for help that was slow to arrive. At one of these meetings, an older counselor commented, "You have the rare gift of translating the technical into the human. We need more of that around here." Estela thanked him humbly, but deep down, she knew that this was the fruit of everything she had experienced. It did not come from books. It came from the streets, from the backyard, from early motherhood, from pain transformed into action. Over time, Estela's story reached even more people. A journalist from a major national website heard about her story and asked for an interview. She hesitated at first, afraid of exposing herself too much, but she decided to accept, on the condition that the article also addressed the flaws in the system, the challenges faced by girls in vulnerable situations, and not just her pretty side of the story. The interview was published with the title, "From the Street to the Council: The Story of Estela, the girl who saved a life and changed many others." The repercussion was immediate. She received messages from all over the country, from women thanking her, from students feeling inspired, from professionals in the social sector asking for permission to use her speech in lectures. Estela was surprised, moved, but also more aware of the size of her responsibility, because now she was not just a girl with a strong story. She was a woman with an active voice, with a real impact, and above all, with an increasingly clear purpose, to ensure that no one else would have to go through what she went through in order to be heard. Even with all the recognition she was beginning to receive, Estela made a point of keeping her feet on the ground. She continued to walk the same streets, shop at the same corner store, talk to the same neighbors who had seen her grow up. She always said that what sustained her was not fame, but her roots. The same roots that made her resist when everything around her seemed to be falling apart. She never stopped visiting the community school where she studied, nor stopping by the old house, where part of her memory still lived. On one of these visits, she found a girl sitting on the same step where she herself had sat so many times, with her eyes downcast and a sad expression. He started talking to her and discovered that the girl had just discovered an unplanned pregnancy. Estela sat down next to her, held her hand and said, "I've been there exactly, and I can assure you that there is a way. With the right support, with information, with love, there is a way." The girl cried, and in that silent embrace, Estela was certain that her story was already serving as a bridge. Luis, increasingly perceptive, began to ask deeper questions. He wanted to know why his grandmother was no longer with them, why his mother received so many invitations to speak, why some people seemed to get emotional just hearing his name. Estela always responded patiently, using simple but sincere words. She explained that some stories hurt, but they also heal, that some pains become seeds, and that, above all, he was part of the strength that kept her going. One day, seeing a photo of her on the college wall with the caption, "Outstanding Student of the Year," Luis pointed and said, "She's my mother," with such pure pride that Estela felt a lump in her throat. There was no award, position, or recognition that could surpass that. The validation that mattered most was there, in the eyes of that boy who had once been saved, and who, without knowing it, had also saved her. Time went on, and with it, new challenges arose. In her final year of college, Estela had to write her final project. She wanted it to be relevant, to go beyond theory and reach real lives. She decided to write about the importance of support networks for teenage mothers in peripheral communities. She used her own story as a starting point, but expanded her perspective to include dozens of other women she met throughout her course, internship, and conversation circles. She interviewed social workers, community leaders, psychologists, educators, and most importantly, other mothers who, like her, faced motherhood without structure but with courage. Each written page was a mix of memory, analysis, and purpose. It was like stitching together all the pain and overcoming she had experienced into a study that could, in fact, influence public policies and social practices. Her professors followed the development of her work with enthusiasm. They said it was one of the most sensitive and at the same time most consistent they had ever supervised. During the presentation of her final paper, the room was packed. There were her classmates, teachers, representatives of the NGO, Rosa, Selma, teacher Juliana, and even Bruno, the mechanic, who insisted on going. Estela spoke with authority, with restrained emotion and confidence in her speech. She explained facts, gave real examples, defended ideas firmly, and concluded by saying, "Welcoming a teenage mother is welcoming two lives at the same time. It is investing not only in the present, but in the future." At the end, the committee stood up to applaud her. She had passed with top marks. She had graduated, and at that moment, as she received congratulations one by one, Estela looked at Luis, sitting with his legs dangling in the chair, smiling from ear to ear, and she knew, with the most complete certainty she had ever felt, that it had all been worth it. Every step, every night of crying, every difficult choice, everything had led her to this point. And that diploma was not just hers. It was part of the entire story that had shaped her. After graduating, Estela received a permanent job offer at the same institution where she was an intern. Now, as a hired social worker, she took on a new responsibility, coordinating a project aimed at providing support to young mothers at risk. It was as if life, in a full circle, had taken her back to where it all began, but this time as an agent of change. She assembled a diverse team with experienced professionals and young graduates, many of whom were inspired by her journey. She created more humanized service, protocols, structured partnerships with schools, health units, and community organizations. The project quickly gained momentum and became a model replicated in other neighborhoods in the city. Estela was not looking for status, but for real impact. Each teenager who entered the space was received with listening, acceptance, and dignity. No judgmental looks, no institutional coldness, just care. And that made all the difference. Despite her busy schedule, Estela never stopped making time for Luis. On Sundays, it was the rule. Lunch she made, a walk in the park, a long bath with games and made-up stories. They laughed, danced, watched cartoons together, and created small but meaningful traditions. One day, while they were resting on the couch, Luis asked, "Mom, when I grow up, can I help other people like you do?" Estela smiled, hugged her son, and replied, "You can, and you should, because that's how we change the world." And in that simple conversation, she had one more certainty. Everything she built outside the house began there, in that strong, loving, secure bond. She was raising a boy with conscience, empathy, and character, and that, for her, was her most important mission. More than projects, positions, or achievements, she was leaving a legacy, and he had a name, a face, a sparkle in his eyes. Her greatest life project was called Luis. Over the years, Estela's story began to be studied in social worker training courses. Her final paper was used as support material. Her lectures became a reference, and her project continued to grow, now with government support and new units being set up in other cities. She was constantly invited to participate in conferences, congresses, and professional training programs. But she never lost her simplicity. She continued to travel by public transportation, with her notes in used notebooks, with the same calm manner of someone who knows where she came from. Whenever she could, she included young mothers from her project in events so that they could have a voice too. "My story matters, but they need to be heard too," she would say. Estela never wanted to be the protagonist for her own sake. She wanted real representation. She wanted collective transformation. At home, Luis was growing up fast. He was already in elementary school, curious, creative, and passionate about reading and drawing. Estela followed his every step with pride. She attended school meetings, helped with homework, and celebrated his small achievements. Sometimes she would get emotional when she saw him sleeping, remembering everything they had experienced up until that point. And when he asked her about the day they met, she would tell him in detail: the heat of the afternoon, the muffled sound in the car, the race to the hospital. She never romanticized the pain, but she also never hid the strength that that moment required. And Luis listened to everything with wide eyes, as if he were listening to a story in a movie. One day, after hearing this story again, he said, "I'm glad you passed by that place that day." Estela smiled and replied, "I'm glad you were there," because deep down, she knew that their meeting was not just a rescue. It was a reunion with what she needed to discover within herself, her strength, her value, her mission in the world. One sunny morning, while organizing the project's documents, Estela received an unexpected invitation. An international human rights institution wanted to honor her at a special ceremony for her work with vulnerable mothers. The news took her by surprise. It was a symbolic honor, but one with great visibility. The ceremony would take place in another state and would involve several social leaders from different parts of the country. Estela hesitated for a few days before accepting. She had never seen herself as someone important. She had always felt that she was only doing what was necessary, what any sensitive person would do. But, encouraged by her colleagues, she decided to go, not out of vanity, but to give visibility to the cause she represented. She traveled with Luis, who was excited about the plane, the hotel, and the idea of seeing his mother being honored. "I'll applaud you just like I do at school," he said with a smile, holding her hand firmly on the way to the auditorium. On the night of the tribute, Estela took the stage with the same serenity as always. She was called a reference for social transformation through care and empathy. She accepted the award with a short, direct, and profound speech. She spoke about inequality, the strength of mothers, and the challenges of the outskirts of the city. But most importantly, she spoke about the power of a gesture. "I didn't save a baby because I was a hero. I saved one because I couldn't turn my back on a life in danger. And that's what we need to teach future generations. That compassion cannot be an exception. It needs to be the basis." The auditorium erupted in applause. Luis stood up proudly and from the back of the audience shouted, "That's my mother!" And Estela smiled with tears in her eyes. That moment wasn't about status. It was about a cycle, about looking back at everything she had experienced and realizing that even without wanting to, she had become a symbol, not of perfection, but of courage, of a new beginning, of humanity. After that tribute, Estela returned home determined to expand the project's reach even further. She knew that this visibility could open new doors, attract important support, and accelerate necessary changes in the community. During a meeting with local partners and municipal authorities, she proposed creating a specific space for teenage mothers within the city's public school, a place for welcoming psychological counseling and academic support. The proposal was received enthusiastically by teachers and administrators. Within a few weeks, the first center began operating in the same community school where Estela had studied. When she first entered that space, she felt a deep emotion. It was as if she was offering the new generations something that she herself had never had, a solid, safe, and dignified structure, a place where the future could be thought of calmly, without fear. There, Estela was not just a coordinator or social worker. She was living proof that history could be different. With the success of this new space, Estela began visiting other schools to replicate the model. Every time she entered a room full of teenagers, her heart sank. She saw reflections of herself just a few years ago, shy faces, suspicious looks, silent stories waiting to be welcomed. On one of these visits, while she was explaining the project, a student raised her hand and asked shyly, "Weren't you afraid of not being able to do it?" Estela smiled, approached the girl and answered, looking her in the eyes, "I was very afraid, and I still am sometimes. But fear is just a sign that we are still alive, fighting. It can't paralyze us. On the contrary, it shows us exactly where we need to put more strength." At that moment, something changed in the girl's eyes, as if she had heard exactly what she needed. When she left, Estela was certain again. Her role was not to erase people's suffering, but to teach them that it was possible to walk with it, face it, transform it into strength. Estela's life continued to transform into a continuous cycle of learning, action, and dedication. Now, with more maturity and growing recognition, she found herself facing a new challenge, teaching the same sense of responsibility and empathy that she had received to other people, to other mothers, to those who were just beginning their journeys. In a meeting with a young mother who had dropped out of school for fear of judgment, Estela invited her to come back. "I know how difficult it is, but don't forget, what you're experiencing today is not the end of your story. It is just the beginning," she said, with that firm tone that she always used. And that is exactly what Estela did throughout her journey. She encouraged others to write their own stories of overcoming and starting over, to break the cycle of abandonment and lack of support that often seemed to be the only way forward. Over time, Estela began to get involved with municipal public policies, helping to create a program aimed at integrating young mothers into the job market. The idea was to give them the chance to return to school and enter the job market without having to give up motherhood. Luis, now 10 years old, accompanied his mother to meetings and activities, began to show a growing interest in helping, and at times helped other mothers fill out forms or organize events. Estela smiled when she realized that despite the difficulties, Luis was beginning to deeply understand the importance of making room for others, of supporting, of creating opportunities. She knew that she was creating a new cycle, not only for him, but for all those who came after. Every small victory, whether at work, in her personal life, or in her family, was celebrated with the same intensity. For Estela, each day was a chance to start over, to keep reinventing herself, to never give up. And she knew there was still much to be done. But as she looked at Luis, at the community she was helping to transform, at the future that was still unfolding before her, Estela felt that somehow she had already arrived where she needed to be. She was no longer just the girl who had once rescued a baby from an abandoned car. Now she was the woman who was transforming lives, including her own. Time passed, and Luis grew up, becoming a teenager with a remarkable sensitivity to the reality around him. Estela continued to educate him based on the principles that had been passed on to her, of resilience, empathy, and above all, action. In one of the conversations they had when Luis was already in high school, he said, "Mom, you taught me to see the world through different eyes. I wanted to do something like that too, something that helps people, that makes a difference." Estela felt immense pride when she heard those words, because she knew that the cycle that had begun with her had not ended. It was expanding, multiplying. That boy who had once been rescued by her now wanted to be an agent of change too. And Estela knew that in some way she was fulfilling her role, not only as a mother, but as a woman, as a citizen, as someone who left a mark of hope in every life she touched. The project to support teenage mothers continued to advance, and Estela became a national reference. Her stories, experiences, and teachings were taken to different states and even abroad, at international events on children's and youth rights. But despite the visibility and recognition, she never strayed from the root of everything she did: care, presence, and affection. Estela knew that her journey was not about personal glory, but about giving others the chance to live with dignity, to find opportunities, and to know that they were not alone. She had become a voice for those who were silent, a hand extended to those who had fallen, a flame lit on the path of those who were still searching for their own light. Luis, who already had plans to pursue a career in social services, was still by his mother's side, more motivated than ever. She knew that, just like him, other generations were growing up with the awareness that the world is not an easy place, but that with the right attitude, it is possible to change destinies. Estela looked to the future with renewed optimism, knowing that she had sown what was needed to continue the transformation. And, more than ever, I knew that love is the force capable of moving mountains. Estela woke up that morning with a different feeling in her chest. It was graduation day for her. Not her own, but that of a group of young mothers she had been with during her senior year. They were there, all dressed in their graduation gowns, with smiles on their faces, some with small children in their arms, others accompanied by their parents and partners. The event was simple, but full of meaning. Estela was at the front, looking at them with a smile full of pride, remembering when she herself, many years ago, thought her opportunities were limited. Today, when she saw those young women receiving their diplomas, she didn't just see the result of a year's work. She saw doors open, dreams come true, the future taking shape. Estela felt once again that everything she had done up until that point, since the moment she saved Luis, had been worth it. She was no longer just changing her own life. She was helping others change theirs too. At the ceremony, the last young woman to receive her diploma stood up, looked at Estela, and said in an emotional voice, "I did this for my daughter, but I also did it for you, Estela. You showed me that, even in the midst of pain, we can find the strength to carry on." Estela felt a tear escape, but she didn't want to show how emotional she was. Instead, she stood up and in a firm voice said, "I am not an example for anyone. I am just someone who one day decided not to give up, and that is something that we can all do. It doesn't matter where we start, but where we decide to go." They applauded, and Estela knew that this was her legacy. Not a legacy of perfection, but of resilience, of a path made of mistakes, successes, and above all, courage. She was raising a generation that would not be afraid to start over, to get up and move forward, no matter the difficulty. As time went by, Estela established herself as a leader in social change, not only in her city, but throughout the state. She received offers to give lectures at schools, communities, and companies, always with the aim of sharing her vision on the importance of empathy, listening, and caring in public policies. No matter where she went, Estela always made a point of emphasizing that her strength came from the roots that sustained her mother, her community, her story. It was not just a personal struggle, it was a collective struggle. And it was with this spirit that she began a new phase, creating a foundation to support young mothers in social vulnerability. The foundation offered everything from psychological and legal support to professional training courses and support for inclusion in the job market. Estela knew that to truly make a difference, it was necessary to create real opportunities for these women so that they would not only survive, but thrive. She did not want to be seen only as a local hero. She wanted other women to see themselves as heroes of their own stories. At home, Luis was already 16 years old, and Estela was immensely proud of him. The boy who had once been rescued from an abandoned car was now about to graduate from high school with excellent grades. He had already expressed his desire to pursue a career in psychology, focusing on children and adolescents, and, without knowing it, Estela felt that he was, in a way, following in her footsteps. They talked a lot about the future, about the paths Luis could take, and about the impact they could both have on other people's lives. "Mom, one day I'll look back and see everything you've done, and I'll be just like you," he said one night while they were having dinner together. Estela smiled, touched his head, and with a quiet sigh replied, "You already are. It's going to be much better, my son. It's going to be much better." When Luis finally entered college, Estela felt a different emotion than she had ever felt before. It wasn't just pride in her son's achievement, nor the joy of seeing him follow his own path. It was something bigger, deeper. It was the certainty that everything he had experienced, everything he had suffered and achieved, was now reflected in his life. Luis studied with passion, dedicated himself intensely to his subjects, participated in study groups, and did volunteer work in nearby communities. Estela noticed in him the same intensity she had had in her youth, but with a special touch, unique to him. And every time someone commented on how dedicated or talented Luis was, Estela responded humbly, "He is the best result that life could have given me." There was no arrogance in her words, only deep gratitude for the destiny that had brought them together. At an academic event at Luis's university, he was invited to tell his personal story as the adopted son of a young woman who transformed her reality through courage and care. Estela was in the audience, quietly seated at the back of the auditorium, as Luis spoke about his mother, how she saved his life and at the same time changed so many others. Estela realized that her journey had transcended any expectations she could have imagined. In that moment, as she heard her son's words echo with emotion throughout the auditorium, she felt that all the pain, all the struggle, all the tears had been transformed into something extremely valuable, a legacy of love and hope. At the end of the talk, Luis stepped off the stage to warm applause and ran to Estela, hugging her tightly. "Thank you for saving me, Mom," he whispered. She smiled, holding back tears. "You were the one who saved me first." It was the cycle coming full circle again, full of meaning, love, and purpose. Years later, having graduated and working as a psychologist, Luis decided to return to the neighborhood where he had grown up, opening a small community clinic to provide free care to vulnerable children and adolescents. Estela helped with the initial organization, sharing her experience and contacts, but made sure to make it clear that now it was his turn to lead and build his own legacy. Every afternoon, Luis would see young people with stories similar to his own, and little by little, he would gain the trust and respect of the community. Estela would watch him with silent pride, recognizing in him the same fighting spirit and welcoming nature that had once led her to rescue him from the car. One day, a pregnant girl timidly entered the clinic and, upon seeing Luis, asked if he was really the son of that strong woman everyone admired. Luis smiled and replied with conviction, "Yes, she is my mother, and everything I have learned about courage, I learned from her." While Luis strengthened his work, Estela continued to work at the foundation she had created, but now more as an advisor, guiding and supporting a new generation of leaders. She did not feel sad about delegating responsibilities. On the contrary, she felt immense satisfaction in seeing her legacy continue, multiplied by so many different voices. At a meeting with new social workers, a young woman asked her how she managed to maintain her enthusiasm after so many years. Estela answered simply, "Because I see the impact. I see lives being rebuilt. I see mothers discovering their own strength, and that renews my energy every day." When she left that meeting, Estela realized how deeply her journey had intertwined with the lives she had touched. It was no longer possible to separate her story from the stories she had helped transform, because now they were all part of the same path of hope, courage, and change. When she turned 60, Estela organized a small celebration at her home. She didn't want a big party, just a cozy gathering with the people who had made a difference in her life. Luis, now an adult, was there with his wife and 2 young children who played around the living room, filling the room with laughter and joy. Rosa and Selma were also there, older, but still carrying the strength and affection they had shared with Estela from the beginning. Teachers, co-workers, old neighbors, each face in that room represented a phase, a defining moment in her life. As she blew out the candles on her simple cake, Estela felt a deep emotion. She looked around, seeing right before her eyes the real legacy she had built, a network of affection, courage, and transformation that transcended generations. She never planned on being an example, but at that moment, she realized that she had built something greater than she could have imagined. Her story had borne real, concrete, lasting fruit, and at that moment, she felt fulfilled. At the end of the party, while she was arranging some dishes in the kitchen, Luis approached her, smiling, now a grown man with children of his own, but still with that special sparkle in his eyes that Estela had always recognized. He hugged her affectionately and stood there for a few seconds without saying anything, just feeling her presence. After a while, he spoke softly, almost in secret. "Mom, everything I am today is because you one day decided to save me." Estela smiled, held her son's hands tenderly, and replied calmly, "No, son. Everything you are, you built on your own. I just showed you the way." And in that silent embrace, she felt that regardless of the difficulties, fears, or losses she had faced throughout her life, she had built an extraordinary story. Not because she was perfect or free of pain, but because every step had been worth it. Every scar had been transformed into strength, every obstacle into learning. And now, looking at her son, Estela knew that she had built exactly the life she wanted to live. Years later, Estela still looked back with a sense of deep gratitude. Sitting on the couch in her home, now more comfortable and covered in photographs, she recalled every detail of that hot afternoon when she heard a muffled cry coming from inside the abandoned car. She clearly remembered the initial fear, the desperation when trying to break the window, the immense relief when holding that baby in her arms for the first time. Luis was nearby, now an adult and with his hair already starting to turn grey, playing with his own children on the porch. That simple scene of a family together on a random Sunday was exactly the kind of happiness that Estela never imagined possible at the beginning of her journey. She took a deep breath with a slight smile, realizing that life had been hard, yes, but generous. Because even in the most difficult moments, when it seemed impossible to continue, she kept going. She did not give up. She transformed every pain into an opportunity, every tear into a lesson. And that was true victory. Later, as the sun slowly set on the horizon, Luis approached her with an old album in his hands. He sat down next to her, and they began to leaf through the pages, worn by time. There were old photos, notes they had written to each other, newspaper clippings, and even drawings he had made as a child. In the middle of the album, Luis found a page that Estela had kept with special care. It was the record of that first meeting, of the news article that told of the poor girl who had saved an abandoned baby in a car. Luis held his mother's hand tightly, moved and said softly, "Mom, look at everything you did. You didn't just save my life, you saved yours too." Estela looked him in the eyes with tenderness and serenity and replied softly, "It wasn't me, son. It was both of us. We saved each other." And so, in the cozy silence of that embrace, she understood that her story was not about loss or pain. It was about courage, about choice, and most importantly, about how love can transform any reality. Did this story make an impression on you? Send it to someone who needs to remember that love can still change the world.